everybody. That shofar sounded amazing. That's about all I heard of the Torah service, but I thank you all for chanting and reading and being together, and our families just had a beautiful service, and someone's going to have to go get the green notebook from the chapel really fast. It's on the stairs, and that's where my sermon is.
Someone getting that?
All right, I'm going to start it while someone runs and gets it, because I know how it opens. It opens with me opening the mail some months ago and receiving something in the mail. It was a postcard. It was green. It was a summons for jury duty. Not just any jury duty, mind you. This was a summons for grand jury duty every Thursday, all day, for 17 weeks, August through November. So my first thought was, there's no way that a rabbi of a large and thriving congregation is going to be able to give up one day a month for 17 weeks, September and October. Are you kidding me? There's no way. And everybody I asked agreed, there's no way, Rabbi, you can do this. So the appointed day arrives, and I travel to the building, the courthouse in Newark, and I'm sitting there, about 100 of us gathered in the room. I am full of excuses. I have my kippah. Thank you so much. That is not it. It is a green binder. It is on a chair. It is on the bima behind the thing. No, someone's going to go get it. Thank you. Somebody go get the green binder on the chair. All right. So all right. Full of excuses, and I have my kippah on my head and my bring them home now prayer around my neck. And it's, I don't always wear my kippah in public spaces, but it's part of my strategy to get out of this. And I have a well-practiced script in my head, and we're sitting, about 100 of us gathered in the room, probably all of us with our well-practiced scripts in our head. And the court clerk, whose name was Rachel, gets up and she says, okay, everybody, here's how this is going to go. The judge is going to call you up one by one. The judge is going to ask you a simple question. Can you serve? This is a yes or no question. Your answer is either yes or no. Not your excuses, not your backstory, not all the reasons why you can't serve, just one word, yes or no. And then she said something that shifted the entire scene for me. Thank you so much. She said, I bet a lot of you came here with excuses for today. I bet a lot of you came here trying to get out of this, but this might change your life. This might transform you. What you hear today might change the way you respond and show up with your neighbors in this community. You might meet people, new people in your life. The country needs citizens for its justice system to work. The country needs its citizens for the justice system to work. Can you serve? Yes or no? What a question for 2025. In Israel, the question of compulsory military service is heart-wrenching, from the national conversation over the ultra-Orthodox refusing to serve to the families who are sending their sons, daughters, and husbands into a war zone. Here in America, we've become cynical, skeptical that our service, be it jury duty, voting, or participating in public life, even matters. Can you serve sounds less like an ethical summons than a request for a second helping of dessert. Our ancestors asked this question too. They knew that the question runs deep. They gave us a phrase that is inscribed in so many sanctuaries like our own, the one inscribed above our ark behind me, Da lifnei mi ata omed. Know before whom you stand. Our sense of service begins with that awareness. Before whom do you stand today? Last year, on the Shabbat of July 4th weekend, I shared a story that I love. It is the story of a man that you've probably never heard of unless you were in shul that Shabbat of July 4th weekend. His name was Jonas Phillips, a Jew who came to America from Germany in 1756. He arrived in Charleston, an indentured servant to another Jew. By 1776, he had earned his freedom, and he was living in New York with his wife and, I kid you not, their 21 children. A patriot, Jonas Phillips joined the fight for American liberty, and he fought in the Revolutionary Army. He loved the idea of this country, but he had a problem. In Pennsylvania, where he moved after the British invaded New York and so many fled that colony and moved to Pennsylvania, he settled there and stayed there after the war. In Pennsylvania, you could not serve in the legislature unless you affirmed under oath that both the Old Testament and the New Testament were divinely inspired. Aware that no Jew could take such an oath, Phillips wrote a letter to the Constitutional Convention. He reminded the delegates that Jews, quote, had supported the cause, bravely fought and bled for liberty, and went on to explain that they could not swear against their faith. And at the top of the letter to the Constitutional Convention and the framers of the Constitution, he wrote the date, September 7th, 1787, or 24th Elul, 5547. 24th Elul, 5547. He put the Jewish date at the top of the letter. Recall, there was not a single Jew participating in the Constitutional Convention. George Washington and his peers must have been mystified by that opening line, which Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik has called the most audacious 8 words in American Jewish history. September 7th, 1787, or 24th Elul, 5547, audacious because Phillips insisted that he would not amputate his faith to serve his country. Audacious because he dared to hold both commitments together, his faith in America and his faith as a Jew. He stood before the founders of this nation as a Jew, and he stood before God as an American. He knew before whom he stood. So here we are, 238 years later, in a bewildering America. I wanted to share the story of Jonas Phillips because I'm not sure we know what stories we are still telling about ourselves or how those stories connect to our sense of service. As Americans, we've become so focused on flaws, the flaws of our founders, the flaws of our leaders, of our neighbors, that we risk losing faith in the nation itself. What story are we telling about America? Are we making it great, or are we greatly misguided? When someone is shot on the street, at work, or on a stage, how is the story anything but one about murder, failed mental health care, easy access to guns? How is the story anything other than moral collapse? How can anyone justify the death of the innocent when a news anchor is fired over remarks about the government? Is the story about censorship or accountability? What story are we in? What stories are we telling? And as Jews, it is even worse. All year, we've been hearing stories other people have been telling about us. That we are, God forbid, bloodthirsty, merciless, inhumane. That chas v'shalom, we care only about money or power. That we are among the cruelest people on earth, committing the worst atrocities. This war, to be sure, is complicated and it is cruel. But we know for sure that none of those stories are true. None of that is true. So when a 12-year-old sits in my office, as she did a few months ago, and said about her Instagram and TikTok feed, "I just don't know what stories are true or not," I said, "Yeah, welcome to the club."
Mm-hmm.
So here is my question for us this Rosh Hashanah, on the eve of this country's sesquicentennial. What stories are we telling about ourselves, and how do they enable us to serve? Here's one story that might help us. The story of Joseph. A few chapters after the ones we read today in Genesis, it is action-packed, it is full of ups and downs. Some pretty terrible things happened to Yosef, including his brothers hating him, planning to kill him, but instead deciding to save him but sell him off into slavery in another country. There, Potiphar's wife falsely accusing him of things that would certainly get him canceled today, and then landed him in jail for 10 years. The ups and the downs, Joseph never loses his faith in God, and eventually, back up, he becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man. You probably know the rest of the story, how he creates a plan to store Egypt's crops for the famine that he's coming, that he sees in Pharaoh's dreams is on its way, how his brothers who are affected by the famine back home in Canaan, they run out of food, and so they come to Egypt and they stand there before Yosef, not realizing he is their brother, begging for help. And when he finally reveals his identity to them, the brothers are astonished. They're terrified. They are sure that he will take his revenge. But that is not the path Joseph chooses. Instead, he says, "You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good." That line is everything. You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good, because Joseph takes hold of the pen. Joseph takes hold and control of the narrative. Instead of revenge, he writes a story of reconciliation. Instead of betrayal, he writes a story of redemption. Instead of brothers who are enemies, he writes a story of brothers helping one another. Instead of letting other people tell his story, he tells it himself. We, my friends, we choose how to tell our story. And that choice shapes not only us, it shapes the entire world. I'm a little obsessed with a study that I read about a few weeks ago from Professor Jennifer Miserka at Texas A&M. She did an experiment with her students who, like many of us, were chronic doom scrollers. Doom scrolling, you know, where you go through your phone, your social media feed, and one story of misery followed by another. And for those who are not on social media, we do the same thing, whether we're getting our news on the television or the newspaper. We collect story after story of doom and gloom. We've turned our phones, our televisions into misery machines. So instead of accepting it, Dr. Miserka tried something new. What if they spent time hope scrolling? She had them create social media accounts dedicated to solutions journalism, stories of problems solved, and hopeful headlines. None of their posts went viral, to be sure, but what happened to the students was remarkable. Many of her students reported that the experience was both illuminating and healing. Before our Hope Scroll project, one wrote, I really didn't realize the amount of negative content I consume and share daily. I see scary news articles. I see people being mean to one another. I spend hours scrolling through posts that have no meaningful purpose. And then get this, some students noticed that their algorithms were starting to change. As they started to see and choose more positive content in their feeds started showing them back more positive content instead of doom. What Dr. Masika's experiment shows is that we are not passive victims of our algorithmic manipulation. We have more power than we think. Every time that we share the bait, outrage bait, or the doom-laden headlines, we're feeding a machine that makes all of us more miserable, but we have the ability to choose differently. The algorithms will follow us wherever we lead. We just have to decide what story we want to tell. Online and in real life. When that court clerk told me the story of jury duty, I changed. I changed my mind and I changed my plan for how I would show up because I was in a new story. When Jonas Phillips wrote the Hebrew date atop a letter, he changed the unfolding of the nation. We stand and we sit and we stand and we sit and we stand and we sit in synagogue on a weekday in September, but it is also Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of a new year, 5786, both dates written in bold atop our calendars, the pages of our lives. We stand before our history. We stand before one another, and as our ancestors imagined on this Yom HaZikaron, this day of judgment, we stand before a God who is calling each one of us one by one and asking, can you serve? So how do we go about it? How do we go about finding our way to a yes? First, it's by turning to these words over the ark as a reminder, Da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand. Today, we stand before something larger than ourselves. Know before whom you stand, God, history, future, one another. We stand before our grandparents who sat in these pews and the ones who perished so that we could. We stand before our grandchildren who will inherit this earth and the wars that we do not turn into peace and the messes that we do not clean up. We are standing before one another. We stand before history. We stand before the future. We stand before all we hold dear. Da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand, and then decide, what stories will you tell this year, and how will they enable you to serve? The blessing we offer one another at this time of year is Kitiva Tova. May you be inscribed in the book of life. But I think this year, I'd like us to think about it this way. May we inscribe the book of life. May we write together the next pages, the next chapters, to be filled with stories of sweetness, of progress, of hope, of all the ways that we all serve this nation in its 250th year, and the Jewish people in the 5,786th of our counting. May we stand before one another this year and write one another into our story in love and in peace and in service. And then may God seal it for good. Gemar Chatima Tova. And let us say, Amen. Our service continues.
I think this rabbi deserves props for doing her high holiday prep while doing grand jury duty. I've barely seen her.
We're We're on page 123 with the Hatzi Kaddish, which leads us into our silent Amidah of Musaf. Musaf, which is 3 sections, each of which enables us to have some quiet time now to decide before whom do you stand and how will you serve. I'm going to ask us to rise. I'm going to ask us to close the doors, and we'll open them again on the other side of the Kedusha to give us a chance to be quiet together now.
Shemei Rabbi